Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. For my fierce and unstoppable girls, Ava, Emily, and Leah. Write it down, he had told me. Write down every word once you get there, before the truth is forgotten. And now we do. At least the parts we remember. Grayson Ballinger, 14. Chapter 1. Kazimira of Bright Mist. The ghosts are still here. The words lingered in the air, each one a shimmering spirit. Cold whispers of caution. But I wasn't afraid. I already knew. The ghosts, they never go away. They call to you in unexpected moments, their hands lacing with yours and pulling you down paths that lead nowhere. This way. I had learned to mostly shut them out. We rode through Sentinel Valley, ruins of ancients looking down upon us. My horse's ears pricked, watchful. A rumble deep from his throat. He knew too. I rubbed his neck to calm him. It had been 6 years since the great battle, but the scars were still visible. Overturned wagons eaten up with grass, scattered bones dug from graves by hungry beasts, the skeletal ribs of giant brezelots reaching skyward, birds perched on their elegant bleached cages. I felt the ghosts hovering, watching, wondering. One of them slid a cool fingertip along my jaw, pressing a warning to my lips. Shh, Cassie, don't say a word. Natia led us deeper into the valley, unafraid. Our gazes scanned the rugged cliffs and the crumbling devastation of a war that was slowly being consumed by earth, time, and memory, like the awkward swallowing of a fat hare by a patient snake. Soon all the destruction would be in the belly of the earth. Who would remember? Midway, as the valley narrowed, Natia stopped and slipped from her saddle, pulling a folded square of white cloth from her saddlebag. Wren dismounted too, her thin limbs gliding to the ground as silently as a bird. Sinove hesitated, watching me uncertainly. She was strongest of us all, but her round hips remained firmly planted in her saddle. She did not care for talk of ghosts, even in the brightness of a high sun. They frequented her dreams too often. I nodded to reassure her, and we both slid from our horses and joined them. Natia paused at a large green mound, as if she knew what lay beneath the woven blanket of grass. She absently rubbed the fabric between her delicate brown fingers. It was only a few seconds, but it seemed to last forever. Natia was 19, only 2 years older than us, but she suddenly looked much older. She had actually seen the things we had only heard stories about. Her head shook slightly, and she walked toward a scattered pile of rocks. She began picking up the fallen stones and puzzling them back into place on the humble memorial. Who was it? I asked. Her lips rolled tighter against her lips. His name was Jeb. His body was burned on the funeral pyre because that's the dull brick way. But I buried his few belongings here. Because that's the vagabond way, I thought, but said nothing. Natia didn't talk much about her life before she became Vendant and a Rattan, but I didn't talk much about my earlier life either. Some things were better left in the past. Ren and Sinove shifted uncomfortably on their feet, their boots pressing the grass into small, flat circles. Natia wasn't prone to sentimental displays, even if they were quiet ones like this, especially if they delayed her well-planned schedule. But now she lingered, just like her words that had ushered us into the valley. They are still here. He was special? I asked. She nodded. They all were, but Jeb taught me things that have helped me to survive. She turned, giving us a sharp glance. Things I've taught all of you, hopefully. Her scrutiny softened, and her thick black lashes cast a shadow beneath her dark eyes. She studied the three of us as if she were a seasoned general and we were her ragtag soldiers. In some ways, I supposed we were. We were the youngest of the Rattan, but we were Rattan. That meant something. It meant a lot. We were the Queen's premier guard. We didn't rise to these positions because we were bumbling fools. Not most of the time, anyway. We had training and talents. Natia's gaze rested on me the longest. I was lead on this mission, responsible for making not just the right decisions, but perfect ones. That meant not only achieving success, but keeping everyone safe too. We'll be fine, I promised. Fine, Ren agreed impatiently, blowing a dark curl from her forehead. She wanted to be on her way. The anticipation was wearing on all of us. Snove anxiously twisted one of her persimmon braids between her fingers. Perfectly fine. I know, Natia said, putting a hand up to stop Snove from embarking on a long explanation. Fine. Just remember, spend some time at the settlement first. Hell's Mouth comes after. Only ask questions. Gather information. Get what supplies you need. Keep a low profile until we get there. Ren snorted. Low profile was certainly one of my specialties, but not this time. Getting into trouble was my goal for a change. Galloping broke the tense exchange. Natia! We turned toward Eben, his horse kicking up soft clods of grass. Snovy's eyes brightened like the sun had just winked at her from behind a cloud. He circled around, his eyes fixed only on Natia. Grizz is grumbling. He wants to leave. Coming, she answered, then shook out the square of fabric she was holding. It was a shirt. A very handsome shirt. She touched the soft fabric to her cheek, then laid it over the rock memorial. Gruvas linen jeb, she whispered, the finest. We reached the mouth of the valley, and Natia stopped and looked back one last time. Remember this, she said. 20,000. That's how many died here in a single day. Vendens, Murgis, and Dalbrek. I didn't know them all, but someone did. Someone who would bring a meadow flower to them if they could. Or a Kruvis linen shirt. Now I knew why Natia had brought us here. This was the Queen's order. Look. Take a good look and remember the lives lost. Remember the people that someone loved. Before you go about the task I have given you, see the devastation and remember what they did. What could happen again. Know what is at stake. Dragons eventually wake and crawl from their dark dens. I'd seen the urgency in the Queen's eyes. I'd heard it in her voice. This wasn't only about the past. She feared for the future. Something was brewing, and she was desperate to stop it. I surveyed the valley from a distance. From a distance, the bones and wagons blended back into a calm sea of green, hiding the truth. Nothing was ever quite what it seemed. Grizz's grumbling to break camp was nothing new. He liked to make camp early and leave early, sometimes even when it was still dark, as if it were some sort of victory over the sun. His horse was already packed when we returned, and the campfire doused. He watched impatiently as the rest of us buckled up bedrolls and bags. An hour's ride from here, we would go our separate ways. Grizz was headed to Civica and Morgan. The Queen had news she wanted to share with her brother, the King, and she trusted no one else to deliver it, not even the Valspray she used for other messages. Valspray could be attacked by other birds or shot down and messages intercepted, whereas nothing could stop Grizz. Except perhaps a quick side trip to Teravan, which was probably why he was in such a hurry. Snove liked to tease that he had a sweetheart there. It always made him explode in denial. Grizz was old-school Rattan, but the Rattan was not the elite, rule-bound 10 it once was. There were 20 of us now. A lot of things had changed since the Queen had come to power, including me. When I began folding my tent, Grizz came and stood over my shoulder and watched. I was the only one who used the tent. It was small. It didn't take up much room. He balked the first time he had seen me use one on a mission to the southern province. "We don't use tents," he'd said with utter distaste. I remembered the shame I felt. In the weeks that followed, I turned that humiliation to determination. Weakness made you a target, and I had promised myself long ago I would never be a target again. I buried my shame deep beneath carefully crafted armor. Insults couldn't penetrate it. Grizz's brooding stature cast a mountainous shadow over me. "Doesn't my folding technique meet with your approval?" I asked. He said nothing. I turned to look up at him. "What is it, Grizz?" I snapped. He rubbed his bristled chin. "There are a lot of open territories here and Hell's Mouth. Empty, flat territory." "Your point? You'll be, all right?" I stood, shoving my folded tent into his belly. He took it from me. I've got this, Grizz. Relax. His head bobbed in a hesitant nod. The real question is, I added, long and drawn out for the effect, do you? He eyed me, his brow furrowed in a question, and then he scowled, reaching for his side. I smiled and held his short dagger out to him. His scowl turned to a reluctant grin, and he replaced the dagger in its empty sheath. His bushy brows lifted, and he shook his head in approval. Stay downwind, then. 10. My hard-won nickname. It was his acknowledgement of confidence. I wiggled my fingertips in appreciation. No one, especially not Grizz, would ever forget how I earned it. You mean upwind, don't you? Eben called. I glared at Eben, and no one, especially not Eben, would ever forget that my life as Raton began the day I spit in the Queen's face.